Dear listeners, thank you for sticking with us and welcome to Season 2. During the summer vacation, the DuraLexSedLex team underwent quite a few changes as our founding members Anna and Alyssa graduated from their LLB studies at the University of Groningen and moved on to start their master's studies at Amsterdam UvA. We wish them all the luck and all the best. To continue the legacy, however, and the project itself, we would like to introduce to you the new members, co-hosts, as well as our new editor, who will be with you for the upcoming academic year and who are very, very eager to bring fresh and intriguing topics to the podcast. So our first co-host is Georgia Kruger. Please tell us something about yourself, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I'm 22 years old and I'm from Germany. And I'm currently studying International Relations and International Organization. And I just started my second year. In the future, I will be one of the 3 co-hosts, and I'm really excited to start this interesting project. And I'm really interested in politics, the topic of human rights and international development. However, I'm also interested in history and culture, and I'm really looking forward to discuss all of these issues or some similar topics in the next episodes.
Thank you, Georgia. Can't wait to listen to you. Secondly, we welcome Eva Shirley.
Hi everyone, my name is Eva, I'm 19 years old and I'm from Ireland. I study International and European Law at RUG and I'm in my second year. I've chosen to do the Technology Law track, so I'm very excited about today's episode in particular. I will be one of the 3 co-hosts and I'm honoured to be part of the team this year and I can't wait to see what exciting topics we're going to talk about.
Welcome, Eva. Hi everyone, I'm Elena and I will be acting as a visiting co-host, so joining sort of every other episode. I am 24 years old and I come from Slovenia, where I finished my bachelor's studies. Last year I moved to Groningen, where I enrolled into a master's degree at the University of Groningen, and where I now teach a first-year course of the LLB called the Law and Legal Skills, a Dutch example, very interesting course by the way, as well as coach a moot court team here for the ELMC. I'm interested in specific topics of public international law and EU law, the very, very particular interest for refugee and asylum law. Now, ultimately, our team would not be complete without our editor, Darina. Hi, Darina.
Hello, everyone. My voice probably won't appear here as often as everyone else, but my name is Darina. I am 21 years old from Latvia, and currently I'm studying at University of Groningen in the International and European Law faculty. My main interests lay within the field of technology law, which will also be my main focus in the next 2 study years. And before coming here, I have achieved a Propedosa degree in The Hague University, participated in MUN and MBP, and taken part in different association activities. And yes, as mentioned before, I am happy to also be part of this podcast as the editor, and I hope our team will be able to create many amazing and interesting episodes for our listeners.
So guys, this is the new team for this year's podcast. We thank you for listening and invite you to follow us on our social media, especially perhaps Instagram, where you can always write to us for some feedback, as well as recommend topics which you would like for us to tackle in our next episodes. Now, however, let's get this show on the road. All right. As everyone who took part in one of our many introductory weeks in Groningen probably knows, the Netherlands is the #1 cycling nation in the world. Also, since a policy change in the 70s, Groningen has been a mostly car-free city. So cars might not be on everyone's mind. However, autonomous driving, and particularly its legal implications, will not only be part of the second-year course of the International Law LLB, right, Eva? Yes. But is also a very current and interesting topic. Therefore, our introductory episode of Season 2 will focus on autonomous vehicles. To discuss this very current and interesting topic, we are lucky to get a hold of Bashar Fteiha. Bashar, feel free to correct my pronunciation of your name anytime, please. Bashar is a Ph.D. researcher at the University of Groningen here in the Netherlands. Previously, he finished a bachelor's in England, specifically at the University of East Anglia, and then a master's in international commercial law at Ghent University. He also worked as a legal consultant in the DMD law firm in Belgium, if I'm correct, specializing in arbitration. Dear Bashar, thank you for making time for us, and welcome to DuraLexSedLex. Before diving into the intriguing world of AI, autonomous vehicles, and self-driving cars, could you please perhaps first explain what is a self-driving car?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's really my own pleasure to be here today. Well, answering your questions, well, there are two possible definitions of what is an autonomous vehicles. And if I always quote the very simple one or the non-technical one, and that's pretty much a car that drives itself from one point to another. However, if we want to get more into the technicality of what is an autonomous vehicles and get a technical definition of it, then it's a vehicle that's capable of fulfilling the operational functions of a traditional vehicle without the need for any human intervention or input. So therefore, the realization of full autonomous driving is fundamentally dependent upon those vehicles being able to satisfy the following primary driving stages that we as humans have to actually fulfill when we're driving our own vehicles. So the vehicle or the autonomous vehicle must have a particular destination to which it needs to drive. The second stage is, well, the autonomous vehicle must be able to perceive its surrounding environment and to locate itself or its position accordingly. The autonomous vehicles then must communicate with other vehicles or other objects on the road, and also in this process to obtain the necessary information concerning road conditions or traffic situation. And based on that, then becomes the final stage, which then the vehicle must be able to make the most reasonable driving decisions and autonomously and independently execute such decisions. So if I want to put it in a nutshell, autonomous vehicles make use of what we call a sense, plan, act process to autonomously drive themselves from one point to another. Then pretty much the main components in autonomous vehicles in terms of the system that enable this vehicle to drive itself are perception, localization and mapping, path planning, and decision making and control.
Kind of like the Tesla and the Google cars and something like that?
Yes, exactly. So all these vehicles, they follow this kind of sense, plan, act process in order to be able to drive themselves.
This sounds very interesting, especially since cars like these already exist, with some extent of automation in the real world. It's also very interesting to think about how autonomous vehicles like such might influence our everyday life. While preparing for this episode, we came across various aspects of it and thought it might be nice to share with you, Bashar, and hear your opinion. So, for example, I saw a really interesting video that described the way autonomous vehicles would change the urban landscape, as people would no longer mind living further away from their workplace, as their commute would be operated by an autonomous vehicle, giving them the time to do work or relaxation while going to work. The so-called urban sprawl and the suburbia would be pushed further into the countryside, creating larger cities. Could you give us your thoughts on this?
Well, if you want me to take it from the various aspects or the intrusive aspect of autonomous vehicles, I think the first, and if you read any article about autonomous vehicles, the most cited benefit or aspect of those vehicles is road safety, is the fact that those vehicles promise to increase and improve road safety. And to give you an example of, this thought is motivated and comes through safety by the fact that road accidents in Europe are one of the common causes of death in Europe. So as a way of examples to give you, in 2019, it was reported in Europe that 22,000 persons have lost their lives in vehicle crashes. So the central question that we have here shifts to focus on the leading cause for the occurrence of these road accidents. Why do we have that much of road accidents? Well, the question or the answer to the question is very simple. It's because of the human error. And it was well established and documented in many articles or research in Europe or around the world that a human error accounts to the vast majority of road accidents within Europe. If we now talk about human error, we need we're simply referring to many actions that we do without realizing their impact on the driving process, such as driving under the influence of alcohol or speeding. All these play a significant role when it comes to causing or contributing to the occurrence of road accidents. So now the question that we have right now, how autonomous vehicles can step in and reduce these accidents. Also, the answer is simple, through the replacement of the human element with the machine. And if we do this, we eliminate or reduce the possibility of a human error. And that is because the driving process will be entirely, or the most aspect of the driving process will be autonomously performed by the vehicle itself, which leaves little or no margin for human error.
I have a quick question though. I'm not very tech savvy, but I saw a lot of news articles and media reports about accidents with self-driving cars as well. Even
Yes.
though we don't have a lot of them, there's been quite a few fatal incidents. How does that come into question then with the correcting human error, but now we have another error on our hands?
That's a very good question. When we talk about eliminating or reducing the possibility of human error, we need to also keep in mind that the machine still does some mistake, and the machine is still in the development process, that it's not really that mature for it to make zero mistakes. However, if we want to compare the possibility of a machine making a mistake and the possibility of a human driving the vehicle making the same mistake, research has actually established that while the machine or the autonomous vehicles can actually outperform drivers when performing the driving or carrying out the driving process or the critical functions of the driving process. However, there is still, until or as of today, it remains entirely clear as to what extent autonomous vehicles can reduce road accidents, because some researchers go and say, well, they will reduce the vast majority of road accidents. Some actually argue, well, if we have those vehicles deployed onto our roads in a great amount, this will increase the travel time. People who don't have driving license, like me, will be able to actually obtain a vehicle and they will be able to drive. Then this could actually lead to an increase in road accidents, because at the end of the day, as I said, we can't, until now in our lifetime, we don't have, as humans, we haven't produced a machine that is 100% safe. Machines still make mistakes, but when we compare them to human, then it becomes a question who does little mistakes or who actually makes mistakes at a lesser extent.
Going off of that, you mentioned that, for example, the use of autonomous vehicles would allow for example, more traffic if there are more vehicles on the road, but also for people who, for example, commute differently because they don't have a license. Now they could use that. But my question regarding that is, do you see any implications on labor law? Not necessarily labor law, but work in general. For example, let's say before you had to drive, but now we have an autonomous vehicle. So would you think that that would also change the flexibility of working hours? Let's say I heard from somebody that at Google, apparently, you can travel by train.
Yeah, so I know in California they have a system where you can travel by a little Google shuttle or Google train, and you're expected to work on your way to work, and you're expected to work on your way from home, or it's not expected, they won't say it, but if you want to meet your goals, you probably should. So yeah, it's that kind of situation. How would that affect?
When it comes to the impact of autonomous vehicles on the labor market, there is two sides to the story. There is a positive side where those vehicles, the introduction of those vehicles into the market or onto our roads will properly increase the demand for professions that require highly technical people. So, for example, software developers will be demanded in the future. AI developers will also be demanded. However, if we look at the negative side, there is a huge risk, or there is a genuine concern at the European level, and I think the European Commission has published a study on that the introduction of autonomous vehicles will negatively affect the European labor through making certain jobs absolute or irrelevant. For example, a taxi driver. Now, to what extent do we need a taxi driver if in 10 years' time we can have a vehicle that drives itself from one point to another and allows you pretty much to enjoy the taxi driver journey that we now have? To what extent also the bus driver, for example. I know certain countries in Europe, or I think in Turkey, that they're actually using autonomous buses in public transportation. I'm not really sure if this is the case, but the world or Europe is moving towards that actually level or that step. So to what extent those professions will be demanded in the future? Because if you look at from cost and benefit analysis, you can actually introduce a vehicle or put a taxi, autonomous taxi on the roads, and then you don't need a taxi driver. You don't need to worry about their salaries or anything that comes with that. And that this vehicle can actually function for many, many years. So if you look at it from cost and benefit analysis, that could actually be really harmful to the labor market. The insurance market as well is going to be heavily affected by that, by the introduction of autonomous vehicles. And the reason is, and here let me just explain two things. First of all, if road safety is to be increased in the future by the adoption of autonomous vehicles, then to what extent insurance sector will be relevant for our time life? Because the reason why we have insurance sector is because, well, there is a risk of accident or the risk of road accident. That's why if you get your driving license, you can't get a car without having insurance. So imagine that, and that's definitely the possibility of you being in an accident is high. Imagine if that possibility is lowered to a certain extent, then to what extent the insurance sector can still properly function if we have autonomous vehicles. Also, those vehicles, when they come and become available to us, the risks that they actually come with, and that's what we will talk about later, for example, the cybersecurity risks. Those risks are something that we don't really know. Like, it's really hard to measure those kind of risks. However, insurance is all based on information. That's why if you go and apply for a driving license or buy a car, they always ask you, have you ever been in an accident? How many times, like, have you ever been fined? Because they need to issue a premium based on your profile. Now, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, imagine that, well, you need to issue an insurance based on something that you don't really know to what extent it's safe, it's secure. Then that's also a problem for the insurance sector that is really, really making a lot of people concerned about to what extent the insurance sector will be able to properly function when autonomous vehicles are here.
I think from what you said already brings us to the next question. You mentioned cost analysis, insurance. And what I wanted to talk about also today is the fact that you work at RUG, so University of Groningen, at the Department of EU Law and a part of the STEP group. However, your main work is very interdisciplinary. Since you, from what I've heard and from what I know, I presume, you tackle issues from a law and economics perspective. Could you perhaps tell us a tiny bit about what is the main point behind this specific interdisciplinary approach, and why is then the topic of today, so the self-driving cars, a good example for it?
Thank you for the question. Well, when it comes to the law and economics aspect, so let me just explain what I'm researching. I'm researching the cybersecurity of autonomous vehicles. Pretty much the problem with those vehicles, as I said, yes, they will bring many benefits, but unfortunately they will bring a lot of risks with them. Risks that we haven't been able to experience in the past. And that's pretty much the cyber attacks. Autonomous vehicles, and there is, in 2014, there was, I think, a very famous video on YouTube where two ethical hackers plotting an attack against a Jeep Cherokee. And if you go and see the video, they have managed to literally conduct some serious attacks against the vehicle to the point that they were able to actually influence the proper function of the vehicle on a highway.
I've actually seen the exact same one. I think it was on CNN something. But my main problem was that was a normal car. That wasn't an autonomous vehicle yet, was it?
And that's what I wanted to say. Imagine that in 2014 or 15, that was the case. Imagine now 2022 or in the future with including more software or installing more software in the vehicle, allowing the vehicle to be connected to outside networks. So the possibility of a cyber attack targeting those vehicles and the ability of malicious hackers to remotely hack into the vehicle and to take control over the vehicle increases in such like a dramatic way. Then it becomes the question, well, what is the rule of law and economics here? Unfortunately, let me put it that way, the study of cybersecurity or looking into cybersecurity has always been done from a purely technical perspective, that we always look for technical solutions. While this is definitely partly the problem that we have lack of technical solutions, but if we look at the actual or the full picture, the reason our systems are not really very secure is because those who are developing those systems do not really properly invest in making those systems secure. So now imagine your phone that is hacked and the data is actually being stolen. Who's going to pay the price? It's you, not the company that from which you actually purchased the phone. So that's why for them, why would I invest in something that the cost of any attack or the cost of any damage fall actually on the user? So that's why the problem with cybersecurity is there is a lack of incentives when it comes to the manufacturers, the developers, that they actually develop these systems, that they don't really have the incentive to actually work towards developing a secure systems, and that's including autonomous vehicles.
So let's say Elon Musk is promoting all the time, well, I know our safety regulations aren't, or the safety of our cars isn't up to par as of yet. We will work on it, but then they never do, basically.
Yes, and in December last year, the New York Times published an investigation an article investigating the safety of the Tesla. While this is not really linked to like the cybersecurity, but it can show you how decision making is taking in at the level of manufacturers. In that investigation, it was revealed that in many times where the developers in Tesla have actually told Elon Musk that we need to introduce this system because it increases the safety of our vehicles. Elon Musk, in many instances, have slammed down those ideas because they would actually, according to him, they would actually slow down the progress of our project. And that's why I think iMobile, the chief executive of iMobile, who was a former supplier to Tesla, made this very good statement that really sums up the whole situation. They say, well, we don't need to take Tesla very seriously. At the end of the day, it's a business, and that's their goal. And the goal of any business is to make money, is to sell. And if cybersecurity, you know that you don't really need to pay a lot of costs when your vehicle is hacked, and it's the user that will be negatively impacted. So why you would actually invest in security? So let me give you an example. So if a manufacturer of autonomous vehicles has the ability to introduce a system that is secure for 60%, it's 60% secure. And then while spending more money and more time, they can actually increase that security system to 80. But to do so, this entails a lot of money, this entails a lot of resources being spent, a lot of time as well, because when you talk about cybersecurity or talk, let's say, about security of vehicles, it's not really an easy task. It requires a lot of testing, it requires a lot of time. Now, if there is no regulation, if there is no one telling those manufacturers that you need to make sure that your vehicles are secure as much as it practicable or achievable, then they would definitely go for the 60 because it's cheaper for them. And that's why law and economics comes in and steps in and tells us, well, let's look at how we can introduce laws that incentivize those manufacturers to actually, instead of going for 60%, they go for 80%. So we increase the security of our vehicles.
Can you incentivize somebody, for example, by changing the liability scheme?
Yes. If we now want to link it to law and economics to actually legal instruments, I can refer to, for example, liability and safety regulation and see how they can actually incentivize all the parties that could actually be involved and or have a rule when it comes to security of autonomous vehicles. So the problem when it comes to liability and the problem when it comes to autonomous vehicles, they will bring a significant shift to the traditional distinction that we know when it comes to pretty much the liability system in driving system. What I'm trying to say here is liability has always fallen on the driver in a road accident. It's rare where you actually find a manufacturer being held for an accident. Now, with the introduction of autonomous vehicles, the question becomes to what extent the user, or we can say the driver, or the guy who's actually sitting behind the wheel, has a role in impacting the accident. And the question becomes further complicated when you look what he or she has a role when the vehicle is hacked. So now it becomes we need to look at the manufacturer. The problem is, in the process of designing and developing autonomous vehicles, many parties are involved. We're talking about software developers. We're talking about the manufacturers themselves, like let's say Tesla or Mercedes. We talk about some server operators or server providers as well, and also the users. So all of them, all these 4 or 5 parties play a significant role when it comes to security of autonomous vehicles. So now, let me just give you this scenario to see how liability will actually change how we look at autonomous vehicles. Imagine that you pretty much late at work, you have this very important meeting. So you enter your autonomous vehicles and then you press pretty much the button, the vehicle starts, but it gives you a note that you need to update the system. And that update is very important one.
The classic Apple issue.
Exactly.
Update.
And that's pretty much what we do all the time as users, that, well, we immediately say later for the update for our phones.
Remind me tomorrow.
Exactly. We press later immediately. So imagine on that specific day, you had the worst luck, and then you said later, you started the vehicle, and then on the way, the vehicle is hacked and has caused damage to a third party. So the question becomes, to what extent the manufacturer of this vehicle is liable? Well, now as a user, you have failed to actually update the system. So let's imagine imagine that this scenario is regulated through a strict liability system, which states that the manufacturer of the vehicle will be strictly liable to all the damage that arises from any accident involving this autonomous vehicle.
Whatever the driver does.
Exactly. Whatever the driver does, whatever the user does, well, even if you're at fault, then
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Exactly. So in that regard, law and economics tells us, well, there is no incentive for the user to actually update, because the user will be like, okay, well, at the end of the day, whatever happens, it's not my fault. It's, I don't know, it's the manufacturer of this vehicle will be actually at fault and will have to pay the cost. Now imagine if we change it to negligence liability, where pretty much it's you as a user has a rule and also the manufacturer has a rule. So in that case, the manufacturer can easily argue, well, we have done or we have fulfilled our task or our security rule by issuing an update fixing a security vulnerability in the vehicle, and that security vulnerability has led to that attack. We have done that. The user has failed to actually live up to his or her duties or like obligations. So then the user will be like, okay, then next time I will have to update my vehicle. This gets further complicated that I read in one of the articles that manufacturers could actually introduce what we call lock-in system. That when you actually do not update your vehicle, the vehicle does not start.
So they kind of protect themselves.
Exactly.
In a way. Yeah.
So then that's the level of security that you can actually introduce. So first you can actually introduce a minimum one where like it's up to you as a user to update or not. But then if we increase the security, you as a manufacturer, you can go on and increase the security by putting in a lock-in system that pretty much prevents the vehicle from operating or from driving or from actually like moving a centimeter if the vehicle this is not updated. Then how liability is going to work in that way?
You talked about, well, safety regulations in general, the liability schemes. Do you think this should or is done by every specific state? Should it be the EU if we're in a European setting? Is it very different in the States? Do you know anything regarding that?
Well, I think when it comes to safety regulation, especially we're talking about EU in this context, I think the best way is to go through an EU regulation or EU instrument addressing these issues to make sure that, well, the vehicles that are introduced in the Netherlands in terms of security and safety are not actually different from the ones that are actually introduced in Germany. And that's also to make it easier for the manufacturers that want to come to Europe, that they know, well, we will be subject to one regulation at the EU level. And that's also in terms of competition and access to internal market, you increase and you welcome those people to come. And it's because if you just tell them, well, the Netherlands imposes stricter regulations in terms of security, but Germany goes for like mild ones, let's say, which it's not the case. The Germans also all the time go like for the very strict rules. Then this is kind of actually, it's not really like a good or beneficial situation for the EU.
And it's like, what's the point of the internal market?
Exactly. So, but the question is now, well, but to what extent a safety regulation can actually be introduced? And what is the form of that safety regulation? Because law and economics tells us, well, yes, you want to introduce a safety regulation, and the purpose of doing that is you want to prevent the accident from arising. Liability is that what we call harm-based legal instrument, that it kicks in or it's triggered once the harm or the accident is caused. And that's from a law and economics perspective. Safety regulation is a prevention-based legal instrument, which pretty much aims to prevent the accident from taking place.
Basically what you're saying, you want to incentivize people to act in a particular way before an accident occurs.
Exactly. So the problem when it comes to now, if we apply safety regulation to the security or cybersecurity autonomous vehicles, there is a fierce debate in the law and economics between what we call rules and standards. Rules are static. Rules are like fixed. Rules tell you, for example, well, if you drive in this road, you have to go pretty much 20 miles per hour. That is a rule. A standard could be, well, you can drive or you should drive in this road, like you actually drive in a reasonable speed. So reasonable speed for me, it could be like 40. For another person, it could be 20. So now when it comes to cybersecurity, a lot, and my tuition or like, let's say, my primary finding is we should go for standards. The reason is that we are talking about a field that is moving at a significant pace. It's insane how every day we have something or technological progress being made. So if we actually go for standards, and although standards are drafted in a very vague manner, but at least they allow the law to stay relevant for a considerable period of time.
But how about legal certainty then? You just mentioned that, well, the manufacturers should know what they're dealing with so they can decide whether or not they want to bring their product on the market. But if you have standards that are a bit more vague, doesn't that affect them, their legitimate expectations, for example?
I agree with you, and that's, I think, the problem when it comes to whether it's rules or standards. But let me answer your question by telling you, if we introduce cybersecurity based on like static fixed rules, we might run into the risk that today we introduce an EU regulation stating to or telling the manufacturers, you need to introduce system A or you need to adopt security standard B. And then in 2 years' time down the line, we actually have a system that's better than the one in the regulation. So the manufacturers can easily go and tell the EU regulators, well, when an accident or like a disaster, hopefully never happens, occurs, they can tell the EU regulators, well, you have told us to adopt this law. You've specifically asked us to implement this system, and we've done so. But if we put it in a very vague manner, we can ensure that the law stays relevant for a considerable period of time. And also we need to think of something that's really important, and that is introducing a law is a lengthy process. And it costs a lot of money. We don't get to introduce laws in like overnight. It takes years to introduce laws.
That actually brings me to such a good question, which is, you actually mentioned that law sometimes is a bit slow, it's a bit obsolete. It can follow technology as quickly as technology evolves. So do you think this is a problem that should be tackled by a former legislator, or the EU legislator in this case? Or should it be by a more tech-savvy organization to which all manufacturers should be forced to be a part of, forced to be a member?
Well, if we talk about force, then we talk about the law. Because we now, like in the autonomous vehicle field or the automotive industry, they have standards. And like you have the ISO standards, you have many standards that actually what we call like common practices within automotive industry. But the problem with those standards, they're like soft law. They're not binding. And also we're talking about a field that's highly competitive. And that's why if you look at Elon Musk's statements, he every year comes up like, in 2020, our vehicles will, like fully autonomous vehicles will be on the road. Because you need to establish yourself first in the market. So the problem with this kind of like leaving the problem to the manufacturers is that we actually leaving the problem to a private party. And that's also what law and economics tells us, well, that the aim of his or her like action or business is to make money, is to actually generate financial revenues. Yeah. So if manufacturers at some point find a security system that is sufficiently good, but it's cheap, and there's another system that's actually better, but it's expensive, and there's no law telling them that they need, for example, to make sure that their vehicles are secure as much as it's practicable, they can go for the cheap one. And that's, for example, in investigations, the thing that I've mentioned about Tesla and Elon Musk that was published in the New York Times, one of like the developers raised the point that, well, maybe we need to adopt another or install in the vehicle another sensors. And the reason why we have sensors in autonomous vehicles is pretty much they act like the human eye. They see the vehicle, how it actually, the surrounding environment of the vehicle. But the problem with this, I think they were talking about the LiDAR sensor. The problem with the LiDAR is that it comes in the top of the vehicle. So that does not fit the amazing fancy Tesla vehicle. And that's why the idea did not go through, because, well, no. We need to have a specific thing. And that now, the reason why Elon Musk rejected the idea, because there was no law telling him, well, safety comes first or security comes first. And cameras are very cheap and LiDARs are very expensive.
So in this case, you also kind of have a battle between how to incentivize the manufacturers to take care of safety, but at the same time, you also want to incentivize the developers to kind of continue with developing something new. If the rules are too stringent, who would want to spend a lot of time and money developing something that then you have to adapt basically how the law is every single month? Every single month there's a new update about how safe it must be, what all you need to add to the car, to the product. Then it's a bit hard on the producer, isn't it?
And that's, I think, one of the problem when it comes to liability and strict liability in providing or introducing strict liability, that it does really diminish innovation. It does have a negative impact on innovation. Because at the end of the day, even the idea of autonomous vehicle has come or like has been produced by developers, innovators, or thinkers that people were like trying to think outside of the box. So when it comes to providing technical and creative solutions to autonomous vehicles, definitely they will have to come from people who like to innovate. The problem, in my opinion, with going for a full strict liability system that does not give any defense system or any ability for people and manufacturers to innovate, that we're actually telling them, do not do anything. We don't want those vehicles. Because at the end of the day, we need to understand that when talk about autonomous vehicles, talk about like the highest level of autonomy or automation, they're not here. They will be pretty much in our society in the near future. So it's all now, we are now in the process of innovating, of process of thinking how we get to that level. So if we now tell them that you will be subject to a strict liability system that leaves you with no option to innovate, then I agree with you. This can have a determinant effect on innovation.
Okay, so I've just been listening to everything that was being said today, and I just looked on CoHosts, and I see that I have a Law of Economics and Innovation in Block 4. And I was just wondering, how will that link into what we've been talking to today, and are they related?
Yeah, well, every time at the end of the course, I come and give a guest lecture where I discuss pretty much the application of law and economics and autonomous vehicles. So everything that I've discussed so far about law and economics and the role in studying cybersecurity and how they relate to incentivize the manufacturers, I go in really further details in the lecture and also the working groups as well. So I give that as well.
So students can actually listen to this podcast before their exam and kind of know more about, well, refreshing their knowledge.
Well, I prefer that they refer to the lecture and the lecture notes and definitely not to the podcast, to rely on the podcast, yes.
Okay, perfect.
So as some of our listeners might consider doing a PhD in the future, they might have some questions or might want some more insight in the work you do. Could you describe your job a little bit more, and what does a typical workday look like for you?
Well, the life of PhD is, as a whole, was like portrayed as a difficult one. It's not really easy to do a PhD. However, it's a fun one, especially if you're researching something that is you're interested in finding answers to. And that's always like when people ask me like, would you actually recommend a PhD or you advise it to a PhD? I always say, well, if you like research, then consider it. But that does not stop here.
Okay.
The other thing is like, well, you need to find a topic that you're interested in because you're going to spend at least 3-4 years of your youth researching this topic. So, and you need to wake up every morning going to the office to research the same topic, trying to find answers. And with that, sometimes you don't find an answers. Sometimes the answers you find are not something that your supervisor like. With that comes frustration.
Okay.
But overall, it's a journey that is worth having. You get to know a lot of people with whom you discuss the same concerns, and that's always like I say to my PhD colleagues that with them we share the same concerns, the same progress, the same journey. But what is very important when it comes to doing a PhD is that you find a topic that you actually want to research, that you want to find an answer to your central research question. How a daily day looks like, well, I think many people who are going to listen to this podcast know me. I'm always in my office from 9 until 5, and then I go home. Sometimes I actually work in my PhD, but do not be like me. So
Really
just from from 9 to 5, then go home and have a social life.
Okay.
I just have a follow-up question. You practiced before as a lawyer, and now you went into the academia. What's the difference between the two? How different is it?
Yeah, well, to correct the question, I haven't practiced as a lawyer. I worked in a law firm, so I've seen the practical side of law, or how things are being done at a law firm. It's completely different. It's completely different dynamic. It's completely different. Like the way you think in a law firm is completely different from the way you think when you work in academia. Well, whether I will stay in academia or go back to legally practice, this is still something that I haven't fully decided. But what we need to understand that both are interconnected. If you are as a PhD or you actually do research or you become a professor, that does not mean that you should isolate yourself from the legal practice. And even if you're a legal practice, and this is when I was working in the law firm, we have relied in many memorandums on articles. On pretty much arguments presented by academics to actually provide to the court. So they are very interconnected, but at the end of the day, where your heart goes and what you're passionate about is something that you need to follow. But do not think that it's completely different things. I totally see that there can be different dynamics, but at certain aspects, they are really, really connected.
So in 3 years' time, we're going to see you as a doctor, but we're not yet sure whether that's going to be then later on a lawyer or a professor.
I think both.
Sounds cool.
I think, a lawyer and a professor, hopefully. But that's not for now. That's going to feel like for many years to come. Yes.
In the future. Now PhD is the first goal.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And last but not least, how can students who might be interested in a topic reach you?
Well, I think I can put my email in the description. So anyone who's interested in the topic, or anyone who wants to have a discussion about it, he or she wants to do their master or bachelor thesis, they can reach me definitely and have to get the approval of my supervisor first, yes. But if anyone is interested, they can email me, and I'm very, very happy to answer any of their questions. Absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you so
That's
much,
so
Bashar,
nice,
for
yeah.
coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time and for the very interesting little lecture, conversation about autonomous driving and cars.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. I believe this will be all from us for today. We believe we have talked and touched upon a lot of interesting points when it comes to the developing world of self-driving cars. Once again, thank you so much for coming, Bashar, and for providing us with your expert input on the topic. And we hope you guys enjoyed the episode as much as we did. And if you liked it, stay tuned for what comes next, because we will be back with more episodes very, very soon. Follow us on our social media accounts, such as Instagram. It's called DuraLexSedLex for more updates. Thank you guys, and till next time.